Hello and welcome to my channel. We're going to start with looking at equivalent fractions. But what are fractions? Well, fractions are part of a number. So they're not whole numbers. For example, 3/4. That's a fraction. 3/4. The top number we call the numerator. And the bottom number we call the denominator. Denominator. So that's what a fraction looks like. It's part of a whole. So an equivalent fraction, the word equivalent means the same as. So equivalent fractions are the same size as each other. So let's look at some equivalent fractions. So if you're given a number, for example 2/3, and you have to find an equivalent fraction, if you look at the denominator, whatever you multiply that by, as long as you do the same to the numerator, you have found an equivalent fraction. So for example, let's say I decide I'm going to multiply the denominator by 10. So I've gone from here to here, and what I've done, I've multiplied it by 10. So I must do the same to the numerator, multiply it by 10, and I found an equivalent fraction. So 2/3 equals 20/30. So these fractions are exactly the same size as each other. They just look different. Let's find some more that are equivalent to 2/3. I can work with either of these two. So let's work with this one. Let's say I'm going to multiply by 2. So I'm going to multiply the denominator by 2. So that will become 60. And I need to do exactly the same to the numerator. I'm going to multiply it by 2. These are all the same as each other, the same size. So like I said, anything you do to one number, you do exactly the same to the other. So let's say I'm going to multiply this denominator by 10. So I must multiply the numerator by 10. So this has been multiplied by 10, and the same has happened to the numerator. So these are all exactly the same size as each other. Let's do another one. Let's do 1/4. So 1/4, and I'm finding equivalent fractions. So whatever you want to multiply by, as long as you do the same to both numbers, you've found an equivalent fraction. Let's multiply the denominator by 3. So we must multiply the numerator by 3. Let's multiply the denominator by 10. So we must multiply the numerator by 10. So these are all the same size. So if you had one big cake and you cut it into 120 pieces and you ate 30 of them pieces, you've eaten 30 pieces out of 120. That would be the same as cutting that big cake into 4 pieces and eating one part of it. 1 part of 4 is the same as 30 out of 120. So again, as we went up, we multiplied there by 3. So we did the same to the numerator. We multiplied it by 3. And then we looked at this one. We multiplied this denominator by 10. So we did the same to the numerator, multiplying by 10. But you could also divide. So if I want to divide this by 2, I must do the same to the denominator as well. So now I'm just dividing by 2. These are all equivalent. So you can either multiply or divide, but as long as you're doing the same to numerator and denominator, then you've got equivalent fractions. So what kind of questions might you see in an exam? So this is a style question you may see. Which of the following fractions are not equivalent to 3/4? So are not equivalent. So let's have a look at what they give you, and they normally give you a list of fractions, so they might give you some fractions like this. So if you use a systematic approach, so I'm looking for what's not equivalent to 3/4. So I'm just going to write 3/4 underneath all of them. And I'm looking at the denominators and the numerators to see if the same thing has happened, and if the same thing has happened to the denominator, to go from there to there, to the numerator, then I've found an equivalent fraction. We're looking for ones which is not equivalent. So let's look at the denominator. To go from here to here, that denominator has been divided by 2. Has this been divided by 2? Yes, it has. So that is equivalent. I'm looking for ones that are not equivalent. Let's have a look at the next one. This denominator, to go from 16 to 4, that's being divided by 4. Has the numerator also been divided by 4? Yes, it has. So that's equivalent. Let's look at the next one. To go from 20 to 4, that denominator has been divided by 5. Has the numerator been divided by 5? No, it hasn't. That one's not equivalent. We'll keep going through and see what the others are doing. So this denominator has been divided by 10. Has this been divided by 10? Yes, it has. That's equivalent. 32 to 4, that's been divided by 8. Has the numerator also been divided by 8? Yes, it has. So we found this is the only one that's not equivalent. So we can write 3/4 does not equal 9/20. Okay, so that's the kind of question you might see in an exam paper. So let's have a look at which of the following fractions are equivalent to 2/3. So this time we're looking for fractions that are equivalent. So we're going to use the same systematic approach. So we're going to write that 2/3 underneath each fraction. And we're going to go through systematically to see if the same thing has happened to the denominator and the numerator. So let's look at the first one. So 9, to go from a 9 to a 3, that's being divided by 3. Has the same thing happened to the top, to the numerator? That's not being divided by 3, so that one's not equivalent. Let's look at the next one. The denominator, to go from a 30 to a 3, has been divided by 10. Has the top, the numerator, also been divided by 10? Yes, it has. That one is equivalent. Well, it's the same number actually. And then this one, 33 to 3, that's being divided by 11. Has the top been divided by 11? No, it hasn't. That's not equivalent. 15, how did that become 3? It's been divided by 5. Has the top been divided by 5? No. And the last one, that's been divided by 9. Has the numerator also been divided by 9? No. So we found the fraction. There's only one of them. This one here is equivalent to 2. So we can say 2/3 equals, it's the same as 20 over 30. It's equivalent. So the only other style of questions you might get for equivalent fractions are, you might be asked to write 3 fractions that are equivalent to a fraction. So we'll just do some of them. Let's have a look. So this is the other style of question you may get in an exam. Write 3 fractions that are equivalent to 2/5. Now we know how to do this because we've done it at the start of the video. Whatever I multiply the denominator by, do the same to the numerator. So you can choose what you're multiplying by. Let's say I'm going to multiply this denominator by 2. So I must do the same to the numerator. I have multiplied this by 2, so I must multiply the numerator by 2. Now we need 3 fractions that are equivalent, so we're going to find some more. Now you can use either one of these to work with. Let's work with this one. I'm going to multiply the denominator by 5. So I must multiply the numerator by the same thing. I'm going to multiply the numerator by 5. These are all equivalent fractions. And like I said before, you don't have to keep multiplying up, you could divide. So I'm going to divide both of these by 10. As long as I do the same to the denominator and the numerator, I'm going to divide by 10. So this is, I divided by 10, and I divided by 10. But actually, maybe I shouldn't have done that because actually I've just ended up with the same fraction that I started with. So let's find another one. I'm going to multiply this 5 by 3 to get 15. And of course, as you know, I need to do the same to the numerator. So multiply that by 3 and that will be 6. So all these fractions are equivalent. Let's do a quarter. So like I said, whatever you do to the denominator, do the same to the numerator. So let's multiply the denominator by 6 to get 24. So we must multiply the numerator by 6 as well. Okay, what about dividing by 2? And divide by 2. And we need another one. Let's multiply this by 10. So multiply top and bottom by 10. So these are all equivalent. So it doesn't matter what fraction you're working with. As long as you do the same to the numerator and the denominator, you will find equivalent fractions. So this is my first video, equivalent fractions. I will be doing a whole section on fractions. Please subscribe if you like the video, and I'll do some more videos.